If there is any one problem that preoccupies us and is the most problematical, it is the problem of the wealthy person. The problem of the rich befuddles us because most of us want to be rich and very few would not welcome it should it come to them. Some do not wish to be rich because of the process of getting rich. Those who do not wish to be rich just do not want to do what they think one must do to get wealthy. There is a problem associated with the gap between the labor theory of value and the profits generated by many businesses. The labor theory of values says there is a just price for a product equal to the labor that is required to produce it. Capitalists argue that this forgets the price of capital. There is also a way of thinking that if X will pay Y for R, then why not charge Y rather than some value below Y? Obviously, this is a system, and it is the one most of us are in, called capitalism. But what it means in practice is that society is a winner-take-all contest where the weak are nothing but a resource to be exploited or discarded, as the market dictates. For the wealthy will always point to the market to justify what they do. If a person cannot get a job, that is the market. If a company can get away with paying starvation wages and charging exorbitant markups on their goods and services, that is the market. Not even libertarians are likely to say this is a system without issues, but the supporters of capitalism always point to communism as the alternative. If one does not approve of the free market, then the alternative is a market controlled by the state. So, they charge anyone who is critical of the power of the wealthy with being a communist sympathizer. That is a weird response considering no one can argue that capitalism is not without its downside. The issue really is, must we shut up and learn to live with it, since the only alternative is communism? Even were this so, there is actually not that much dividing them. If you project them forwards in time, one finds an odd transformation occurring, where the one becomes the other. The highly advanced communist country ceases to feel obliged to prioritize the workers' interests and begins to focus on the economic success of the companies under state control, while in the capitalist nations, businesses become so big and so concentrated in so few hands, they become the de facto government. This is what globalism means and foretells the amalgamation of communism with capitalism. Yet, cries to eliminate the wealthy are simply a distraction. The wealth does not just disappear and much of this property is not divisible in any meaningful way. What often happens in a socialist country is that the politicians take over the property that used to be privately owned. Only the owners change, not the disparities in wealth. In any case, are the rich really the problem? It is true that morally the idea of such levels of inequality are repugnant. But the oft-repeated complaint that no one needs so much money is precisely the point. At some level one can spend only so much on oneself. Consumerism has its limits. And so, the vast proportion of the money that rich people have is tied up in businesses. Even when a billionaire buys a luxury yacht for $300 million, there is a lot of labor that goes into manufacturing and operating these boats. Mansions also require a lot of upkeep, and a lot of jobs are created by the need to maintain the real estate of the wealthy. The poor, in contrast, spend the greater part of their money on basic goods and services that do not require a lot of labor to produce or maintain. 1 million poor persons will likely produce more demand for consumer goods than your average millionaire, but the demand generated by the poor is not likely to result in the production of high-end or technologically advanced goods. It is because of the wealthy we have the great masters and much of our personal technology. Not only do the wealthy buy fine art and furnishings, but they also maintain these things and often turn them to museums for the appreciation of the public. The poor do not care for what they have. It costs money to buy things that are durable and it costs money to maintain things. But more importantly, one does not have to be rich to be greedy, lazy, or criminal. These things are all well represented in populations of poor persons. Being poor is rarely a moral choice. It is more likely forced upon the poor by the wealthy than to be a condition taken up willingly. However, we ought not forget that poverty is often a self-imposed condition in the sense that poor people do things that will result in poverty. Conspicuous consumption is something usually attributed to the wealthy, but this is after they are wealthy. Poor people are notorious for consuming what they earn, failing to invest or save. Sometimes the poor do not earn enough to permit savings, but it is more likely they are attempting to live beyond their means. Incurring debt is a sure path to poverty if one is not building up equity faster than debt. If one needs to borrow this week because one's income is insufficient for this week's needs, what will next week be like when one has the additional cost of repaying the debt? In truth, the rich get rich for several reasons, only some are due to their own pre-planning, but it is usually the poor that make the rich wealthy. Perhaps this is why they are so often hated by the poor. The poor hate the rich for their own poor decision-making. The man who spends his income on porn and booze may hate the supplier of porn and beer, but it is he who is purchasing it. The rich could not get rich without other people's money, which is more often than not, given freely and often eagerly. If one is not wealthy oneself, why go to games and concerts? Why spend the money venerating people for a skill that does nothing substantial to help you? Why fill your home with conveniences that only force you to slave away at a job to pay for them, when they do not last even until the last payment is made? We often buy stuff that must be replaced over and over again, exhausting our wealth. Why do the poor make so many people wealthy when it is not helping them? The rich get rich because consumers make them rich. The rich are skilled at separating those who do not have much resistance from their money. But does this mean the problem is the wealthy person who exploits the weakness of others, or the weakness of the poor who cannot get into the right habits that would allow them to accumulate wealth? But that being said, can we all be wealthy, or is it the relative difference between income that is the problem more than the level of income? After all, even the poorest person in the Western world has more resources than most persons throughout history. Not even kings could dream of the wealth of the average American home, during most of mankind's history. Unfortunately, we have become fixated on the symptoms rather than the problem. Rich and poor are symptomatic of a flawed way of thinking. The rich as championed by capitalism represent one aspect of the problem, and the poor as championed by communism and socialism, and to a lesser extent by democracy, is the other side of the problem. But both are symptoms, and one cannot solve the problem by dealing with a symptom, regardless of which side of the problem you choose to focus on. The rich get rich because they are able to accumulate capital. If you live in a system in which X is possible, X will be present. It's not rocket science. Living in a system that not only makes X possible, but probable if not inevitable, while complaining about the existence of X, suggests one is insane. Capitalism will not work without the accumulation of capital. Capitalism is predicated on the possibility of people accumulating capital. Once this first step is accomplished, how far is it to keep the process up? That is, once you have accumulated a store of capital, why not just keep on doing that? The concentration of wealth is built into the system. People hate the disparities of wealth that occur in capitalism, but how can one hate what is natural and inbuilt? It is impossible to have capitalism without the accumulation of capital, and it is impossible to accumulate capital without inequality. You can opine that the inequality is too great, but how do you block the accumulation of wealth at any level, without destroying the entire system? Tribalism is the belief that our identity comes from history. The English are a tribe because the English are defined by a common history. When we forsake the wealth of a people to placate a few individuals, we have lost the basis of our existence. When we forsake the tribal identity, we are cut adrift. Capitalism assumes identity is absent or attached to whatever we value. Communism assumes humanity is our identity and everything must be subsumed under this collectivism. Liberalism in its broadest sense, attaches identity to skin color, religion, race or some other attribute. These are factors or elements that do not constitute a true identity. The tribe gets its identity from a shared history. The family has a very tight history and serves as the proto-tribe. Generally, the tribe is those in geographical proximity because usually those who live close together share the same background, a truth liberals are attempting to overthrow. There is also the history of the market. The market is composed of tribes. The free market, properly constructed, is tribal. Our tribe is also fixated on how we interact with the free market, that is our specialization. This is where the guilds come from, an idea corrupted by unionization, but which harkens back to the tribal unity of labor. To deal with the rich and eliminate poverty, we must place our identity on the tribe. The tribe owns the resources specialists need for their participation in the market. The tribe owns the factories and other accoutrements of the market. As such, we work for the tribe and are paid by the tribe, using a tribe-based and issued currency.